Stand by for action.
Thanks for joining me. My name is Dave Miller. I am the Unpleasant Blind Guy. On June the 14th, 2017, Tucker Carlson of Fox News had a program where he covered the attack in Alexandria on Republican congressmen by a Democratic terrorist.
This morning, a gunman opened fire on a group of Republicans practicing for the annual congressional baseball game, a charity. The shooter, who was a man called James Hodgkinson, was an enthusiastic progressive and a Bernie Sanders supporter who appears to have done this for ideological reasons. Before opening fire, Hodgkinson asked whether the baseball players were Democrats or Republicans. At this point, the only death is the shooter himself.
Now, there are a number of things that Mr. Carlson needs correction on. The individual that fired on Republicans in Alexandria that day was not a gunman, he wasn't a shooter, he was a terrorist. A Democratic terrorist, or if you will, a progressive terrorist. This was an individual radicalized by the progressive left. A man who had been told for years that it was okay to do harm to people he disagreed with politically because he was on the side of good. So let's not mince words about what this man was. He was a progressive terrorist. Pure and simple.
But 5 other people were wounded badly in some cases. 2 Capitol Hill police officers, a Hill staffer, a lobbyist, and the House Majority Whip, Steve Scalise of Louisiana. Mr. Scalise remains in grave condition tonight in a Washington hospital. There are reports that the president will be visiting his bedside sometime this evening. We'll keep you updated on that. But this morning, in a depressingly familiar ritual, journalists and politicians wasted no time trying to score political points from the shootings.
Again, let's be accurate. Not from the shootings, but from the progressive terrorist attack.
Blogger and Twitter buffoon David Frum may have been the quickest to the scene. As the rest of the country was waking up to the horrifying news of what had happened, Frum was busy writing his sermon. Quote, Virginia, no background checks, no licensing, no registration, no permit required for concealing of carried long guns, open carry long guns, and handguns. Well, it'd be funny if it wasn't so gross and absurd. A concealed carry permit for a rifle? What does that even look like? And by the way, Virginia does require a background check to buy a gun. But Frum was not alone. In a morning statement, Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe claimed that 93 million people die every single day in this country thanks to gun violence. 93 million, more than a third of the country murdered every day of the calendar year. The governor said that multiple times. This is what happens, of course, when ignorant liberals talk about firearms, but it misses the point anyway. What happened today isn't horrifying because it was gun violence. It's horrifying because it was political violence, and therefore it threatens the basic stability of our country. That's why shooting a congressman for his party affiliation is a bigger deal than killing a man in a bar because he hit on your wife. They're both bad and immoral, but only one could potentially lead to civil war. Some on the hard left understand this, and that's why they support it, because political violence could lead to the dissolution of a country they despise, this country. Huffington Post writer Jesse Benn tweeted his approval of the Scalise shooting, quote, the world would be a better place without him, end of story. Benn's only criticism of the attack was its limited scale, quote, for violent resistance to work, it'd need to be organized. Individual acts can be understandable, but likely counterproductive or ineffective. Whoa. On the other side of the divide, some are looking to blame the media or Bernie Sanders for the shooting. It's an understandable temptation, maybe, but it's best resisted. The only person directly responsible for what happened today is the man who pulled the trigger.
Now, usually, I couldn't agree with Tucker Carlson more on most of his commentary. But this time, I couldn't agree with Mr. Carlson less. Even if you looked at this progressive terrorist attack as a regular murder, you would have to apply the 3 classic elements: means, opportunity, and motive. Motive being usually the primary element for murder and terror. You see, I can have a fully loaded MAC-10 in my backpack and go to an outdoor event in the city where I live, and that will give me both the means and the opportunity. But the motive to take that Mac out and begin mowing people down is not only not there, Doing so would be counter to my morals and ethics. Therefore, it would never happen. Mr. Carlson is right when he says that the fact that a firearm was used in the commission of this progressive terrorist attack should not be the main focus. Motive is what we should be looking at. And in the case of the progressive left, their followers have been given motive by movie producers and actors, by television producers and actors, by people doing live performances, by musicians, and progressive politicians for as long as I can remember. And that memory goes back to the Democratic National Convention of 1968, which itself was disrupted by violence perpetrated by the progressive elements in the Democratic Party.
That said, there are some lessons we might be able to learn from what happened this morning. One is that in this volatile moment, and it is volatile, people with megaphones ought to be responsible about what they say. That means never excusing political violence under any circumstances. That means condemning shootings like this, but it also means riots, assaults, occupations, threats, any other attempt to achieve political goals through force ought to be condemned.
And, just for the record, I have always condemned violence against those who oppose personal liberty. It may be gratifying in the short term, but it is counterproductive to what we want to do as conservatives, and it's just plain wrong. Both from a secular and, more importantly, from a Christian standpoint, we have to set the example of not using physical violence against our enemies, no matter how tempting it may be sometimes to do so. We can and should defend ourselves, but it is not for us to take revenge, and it is not for us to be the aggressors.
Being responsible also means being intellectually honest and not implying you know more than you actually do know. If you believe, for example, that Russia had improper involvement in last fall's election, that's fine. Make your case. But don't accuse your political opponents of treason unless you have hard evidence that they committed treason.
You see, Mr. Carlson loves to be pontifical in this piece of his. But part of the reason he's doing this particular part of it is so that people will turn away from the new mainstream media. Places like High Plains Pundit, One News Now, TECN, and SHR Media, and return to Fox News, which has, quite frankly, lost a certain amount of its credibility because it has begun to drift into the progressive left memes itself. You see, people, you have to recognize manipulation wherever it comes from, whether it comes from Tucker Carlson or whether it comes from me. And question old Tucky Tuck, and question me. I don't know about Tucker Carlson, but I'll be glad to answer. Just get hold of me at UBG Contact on Twitter. That's where you can contact me with comments, questions, show suggestions, also American suggestions. It is the main contact point for this show.
It seems obvious, but there are big ratings in conspiracy theories these days, and some can't resist. They should resist.
Or should they? People, go back and listen to my show, Uncovered. If it had not been for one brave woman who contacted WorldNet Daily, a rape jihad crime right here in the United States of America would have gone completely unreported by local and national media. People, we live in a world right now, unfortunately, where it is government policy in Europe, in the UK, and sadly now in the United States of America to cover up certain stories, for instance, and increasingly, stories to do with Islamic terrorism. 20 years ago, I would have laughed at the conspiracy theorists, but we've seen example after example of governments and the media ignoring important stories and not covering them. And in a world where every major newspaper begins to become Pravda and every traditional news agency begins to become TASS, the people have to look at everything and check it for truthfulness. Tucker Carlson can call that conspiracy theorism all he wants. But until Fox News and the rest of the fake stream media begins to cover all of the news truthfully and in an unbiased manner, the people are going to have to both cover the news and disseminate the news for themselves.
Above all, though, don't dehumanize your political opponents. The people who disagree with you are still people.
Mr. Carlson might be better to aim that opinion at people like Hillary Clinton. Remember this from her 2016 campaign?
Be grossly generalistic. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables. Right? The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it.
It does begin with the Alinskyite tactic of dehumanizing political opponents. And one could say that Hillary Clinton came by this honestly, because former President Barack Hussein Obama gave tacit permission for his supporters to invade people's personal space in his 2008 campaign.
I need you to go out and talk to your friends and talk to your neighbors. I want you to talk to them whether they're independent or whether they are Republican. I want you to argue with them and get in their face, and if they tell you that, well, we're not sure where he stands on guns, I want you to say he believes in the Second Amendment. If they tell you, well, he's going to raise your taxes, you say, no, he's not, he's going to lower them. You are my ambassadors.
Politics is not a referendum on virtue. It is not a holy war.
Here, I must disagree with Mr. Carlson again, because, as I've said, the United States of America walks on two legs: the secular leg of law and the Judeo-Christian leg of ethics. Our belief in a Judeo-Christian God and our struggle to do as we believe he would wish us to do are integral to both the political operation and the political debate in the United States of America. It is more than legitimate to discuss things like virtue, honor, and yes, even the adherence to the traditional morals that sustained our nation for 200 years.
It's a debate about how best to run the country. Reasonable people can disagree on that. They have for hundreds of years.
Now, Mr. Carlson is correct in that debate has existed in the United States of America before we even became a country. And if you look back at some of the rhetoric in some of our earlier presidential campaigns, you'll see that people didn't hold back on the language, the hyperbole, false accusations, misrepresentations, mischaracterizations, and everything we have today in political debate. But today, a whole new dark dimension has been added to the political discourse in this country. And it has been started, fueled, and fired by the progressive left. At this time in our history, those who began as the proponents of centralized power in our nation have evolved into those who are advocating violence against those with whom they disagree.
The other side isn't evil. They are wrong. More than anything, they are our fellow Americans, kin to us, and that means far more than any differing view on Obamacare or marginal tax rates or even Russia. If you keep that in mind, you won't lose your decency.
Well, I'm sure it made Mr. Carlson feel really good to give that commentary. I'm sure, as is true with everyone who stands on the sidelines and declare with self-ascribed wisdom that there is good and bad on both sides, and that everyone should just come together, Mr. Carlson feels that he's scored some really great points for himself. But what he's not pointing out is that in our society there really is an us and a them. You see, people, conservatives believe that speech and expression in the United States of America are rights given to us by God. They are infinite. The only limit to them is when they interfere with others' conduct of their normal daily business, or their property, or their persons. In that way, conservatives debate, and sometimes rough and even offensive language is used, but it never goes physical. The progressive left, on the other hand, has not only called increasingly for acts of violence, they have begun them. Some motivation for this recently was given by former President Barack Hussein Obama's Attorney General Loretta Lynch in an impassioned video, which was later posted on Facebook on a page of Senate Democrats as words of inspiration.
And it has been people, individuals, who have banded together, ordinary people, who simply saw what needed to be done and came together and supported those ideals, who have made the difference. They've marched, they've bled. Yes, some of them have died. This is hard. Every good thing is. We have done this before, we can do this again.
Inspiration indeed. You see, people, over the decades, the followers of their progressive left rulers have been desensitized to the pain of others. This has reached an almost psychopathic level. Just as Muslim terrorists are desensitized to the pain of others through watching and participating in domestic animal torture. Just look that stuff up, guys. It's on the net. It's sickening. So the purveyors of the progressive left have been desensitized to the anguish of others by a constant flow of propaganda from the left-controlled media. You see, if someone's a bad person, and really inhuman, then it's okay to do whatever you want to them, right? I have two examples of where this can lead apart from the progressive terrorist attack at Alexandria. First, let's listen to the wife of the progressive terrorist.
I knew this was going to happen, and I don't know what to say about it. I can't wrap my head around it, okay? And I just want my neighbors to be in peace, and you guys leave them alone.
Is there anything you want to say to the victims who were shot?
I don't even know who was shot. They haven't, no. I'm sorry that he did this, but there's nothing I can do about it.
His wanting to work on taxes, that's a really strong motive for a lot of people to work hard to change things in government. Is that something he had talked about? What gave you the idea that that's what he wanted to do?
That's what he said.
Was that
he wanted to go up there and work with people to change the tax brackets. Okay?
How long had you guys been married?
Almost 30 years.
There was a gentleman that came up here yesterday, and he says that he was a high school friend, that he had known him for many years, and he conveyed a message. He said he believed that your husband was, in his words, were fed up with the system. Is that a fair assessment? Is that...
Probably, but I really don't want to answer these questions about his politics. I don't.
Ma'am, when did you realize that he was leaving? I'm sorry, I'm Gabrielle from the New York Post. Did he call you, or did he tell you before he left?
Oh, he made preparations for leaving.
Ever been involved in?
What kind of preparations did he make?
He sold almost everything he owned from his businesses.
Has he changed
advice
in the last few
about
months leading up to the...
No, we go.
Okay, you done?
I had enough.
Okay,
enough.
you guys got everything basically that you wanted to hear, so. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Tell my niece hello. Monica Adams. Oh, really?
Thank you.
Now, I don't know about you guys, but I found that less than empathetic. It's almost as if this woman just couldn't be bothered with this inconvenience of reporters on her doorstep asking what could have motivated her husband to commit this terroristic act. Because you see, people, she didn't think it was that big a deal. The only thing she's sorry for is the fact that she's now being inconvenienced. And then my second example, Mr. Jim Devine. I was alerted to Jim's activities by a friend of the show, who prefers to remain anonymous, but whom I appreciate and admire very much. We're going to begin our trip to the Jim with a post from GOP Presidential dated June 16, 2017. That has the title, New Jersey Democrat Calls for Hunting Republicans. Now I must add that this is a pretty good blog post, as it does what they should all do, which is provide reference links so people can chase things down and confirm them as real. After a shooter in Alexandria left House Majority Whip Steve Scalise in critical condition and wounded 4 other people, a longtime New Jersey Democratic political strategist responded by introducing the hashtags Hunt Republicans and Hunt Republican Congressmen. We are in a war with selfish, foolish, and narcissistic rich people, wrote James Devine on Twitter. Why is it a shock when things turn violent? And I'll stop here to say that selfish, foolish, and narcissistic rich people sound exactly like the rulers of the progressive left. To continue, Devine has run for office, consulted for numerous New Jersey campaigns, and worked in the office of state lawmakers. He's also a blogger. In an interview with MyCentralNewJersey.com, Devine said, "If you want to invite a class war, then you have to expect people to fight back at some point." The Democratic strategist also wrote on Facebook that he had little sympathy for Scalise because of his lack of support for gun control. Now let's examine some of that. The only ones, frankly, that I can see that are acting as if they're in a shooting war are the progressive left. You see, unlike the progressive left, conservatives want there to be multiple classes of people with an equality of opportunity for people to move up from whatever economic class they might happen to be in. The progressive left, on the other hand, are politically advantaged to leave large voting blocks of people in just such a state of poverty and dependence so that they will support their rulers. And Mr. Devine is, frankly, a rather clever portion of the leftist propaganda machine, as you will see in his remarks. Now he speaks of a fight back. Conservatives fight back at the polls. Conservatives fight back with commentary. Conservatives fight back with education. The progressive left, on the other hand, has been taught to fight back with fists, pepper spray, kicking feet, and now firearms. And let's not forget that in the past, the progressive left have fought back with bombs. If you want proof of that, I've put a list in UBG Contact on Twitter of terrorist attacks, assassinations, and similar incidents beginning on April the 14th, 1865 and continuing until today. You will see that from the second half of the 20th century, almost all significant violence of a terroristic nature has either come from the progressive left or their Mohammedan allies. And let's not forget Mr. Devine's opportunism to push for gun control. You'll hear some more of his logic on that later, but you get a glimpse into the personality of the progressive left by his statement that he has, quote, little sympathy, while those on the conservative right actually pray for the salvation of their enemies. Now, the old jungle gym is further covered by Nick Musgrave, with staff writers Suzanne Russell and Bob Jordan contributing, in the article earlier referenced from MyCentralJersey.com, updated June 16, 2017. This article is titled, Democratic Strategist Jim Devine Defends Hunt Republican Congressman Tweets. Rahway. Jim Devine, a Democratic strategist, sent out a tweet from his Twitter account Wednesday afternoon with the hashtag Hunt Republican Congressman after the shooting of Republican Congressman Steve Scalise. I think it speaks for itself, Devine said of the tweet on Thursday afternoon. Yesterday's events are the result of escalating rhetoric and vitriol that has been evident in our political system, culminating with the election of our president, and the chickens came home to roost, you know. I'll stop there to say, anybody remember that famous quote from the quote-unquote Reverend Right concerning terrorism perpetrated towards the United States of America?
That what Malcolm X said when he got silenced by Elijah Muhammad was in fact true. America's chickens are coming home to roost. We took this country by terror.
It seems that when it comes to violence, Mr. Devine is in complete agreement. Now, one of Mr. Devine's tweets is the following. In 2002, Scalise was a speaker at the European American Unity and Rights Organization, EURO, a group founded by David Duke. Hashtag Hunt Republicans. This tweet came from June the 14th of this year. Now, to stop there, I don't know whether David Duke founded this organization or whether Mr. Scalise actually spoke at it. But I do know that whether he did or he didn't, he did not deserve to be shot. Evidently, old Jim Sock seems to think that he does. To continue, Devine said that the tweet may come as a shock to some, but it may awaken others to the vicious political environment that he said has emerged in the last couple years. That's how they wrote it, folks. And swelled dramatically since President Donald Trump's election. Now, I'll stop here to say that it's quote-unquote swelled dramatically because of the quote-unquote resistance movement. Because of things like Madonna's threat to blow up the White House, numerous threats and protests by Democrats and progressives in which they metaphorically assassinate President Trump, and the overall violent temper tantrum that seems to have engulfed the entire progressive movement. To continue, I think some people will be shocked and offended, he said, and other people might be woken up to the fact that this is nothing that wasn't invited by things like Sarah Palin's crosshairs on Gabby Giffords before she was shot. I'll stop there, guys, to say that this is an out-and-out lie. Remember, guys, I've told you this before. The progressive left are the mind masters, the truth twisters, the puppeteers. When they're not openly lying to you, they're twisting facts to suit them, they're working off of innuendo and misrepresentation, and they're using each and every psychological trick that they can pull out of their hats to negate the American Revolution and put their rulers in charge of a tyrannical state. You have to be aware of the manipulation. And remember, if they're accusing someone else of doing something, they are almost certainly the ones who not only are actually doing it, but who have been doing it for some time. This is called redirection. To continue, Devine went on to say that by using Republicans' gun rights rhetoric, one could make the case that Scalise's shooter was utilizing his Second Amendment rights. Or Senator Rand's charge that the Second Amendment wasn't so that people could hunt rabbits, it was so they could fight against a tyrannical government, he added. Well, now that we have a tyrannical government, to use another Republican's words, James Hodgkinson is a citizen availing himself of his Second Amendment remedies. Now here's why this quote-unquote logic of Mr. Devine's doesn't work. When conservatives say that the Second Amendment exists so that the people may defend themselves from a tyrannical government, that's exactly what it means. So that the people may defend themselves. We do not say that the Second Amendment is there so that we may assassinate our political enemies. But Mr. Devine intentionally twists what, in my opinion, the Founding Fathers meant by Second Amendment protection to excuse the terroristic actions of one of his fellow progressives. As you'll see if you read that list that I provided, the progressive left uses weapons to attack. Conservatives use weapons to defend. Now, folks, a little further down in the article, we get this. A state Democratic official disavowed Devine's tweets Thursday. A spokesman for New Jersey Democratic State Committee Chairman John Curry said, "The organization is in no way associated with Mr. Devine's hashtag." I'll stop here to say that that's very interesting, especially when you get progressives alone. You see, guys, there's always a public and a private face of the progressive left. The public face, the one that tries to give their rulers a veneer of decency, reference again to Mr. Carlson, is one that always publicly abhors violence and are some of the first to condemn it. Privately, when you talk to progressives, they do things like what happened about 20 years ago when I was speaking to some progressives on an internet relay chat channel. One of them joked to me about possibly carpet bombing the Midwest because that would reduce the number of Republicans. Only really, they weren't joking. To continue with the article, we reject incitements of violence and deplore such sensationalism said the spokesman, Matt Farauto. The article goes on to give a little bit more background on old Jimmy Boy. Devine formerly served as a political consultant to attorney Billy Delgado when he ran for mayor in Perth Amboy in 2012. Delgado, who formerly served as Perth Amboy's Democratic chair, declined comment. I'll stop here to say, no wonder. To continue, when Ratha Mayor Samson Steinman was running for re-election, he was challenged by Devine, who has been involved in politics for 35 years and previously worked on campaigns for former mayor and current Assemblyman James Kennedy and State Senator Raymond Lesniak, Democrat of the 20th District, but has not held elected office. And given Mr. Devine's lack of empathy, it's a good thing. To continue, Devine also had previously worked for various media outlets in New Jersey, according to the bio on his website. In 2013, Devine was arrested and accused of shoplifting about $22.47 worth of merchandise from a ShopRite store in Leiden. A store loss prevention office told police that Devine was observed on surveillance camera placing 2 bags of lettuce, a bottle of hair conditioner, a container of protein powder in a shopping bag, and walking out without paying. Devine on Wednesday also posted a tweet with the hashtag #HuntRepublicans. He said that although he does not condone violent acts, Republicans who speak with aggressive rhetoric should be prepared for violence. All right, let me just stop there to say that in a way, is the money shot. All of the time that I can remember, the progressive left has been speaking with increasingly aggressive rhetoric in derogatory terms aimed at the conservative right. I have never, and will never, stoop to old Jimmy Boy's level. In the great arena of ideas that is American political speech, there is no room whatsoever for violence. To continue with the article, if you want to behave in an uncivilized and violent manner, which I do not condone, although which he just said people should be prepared for if they say things that make his compatriots angry. But if you want to operate under those circumstances, he said, then you have to be prepared to accept those consequences. But let me stop here to say that the ones acting violently at this point are those who agree with Mr. Devine. He said that lawmakers should be focusing on passing better gun control laws and toning down vicious rhetoric, but that Trump instead incited violence during his campaign. I'll stop here to say that no, what President Trump did during his campaign was make speeches. Violence, and this is something that Jimbo and the progressive left need to be reminded of, is not a proper response to speech. Even speech that they might find offensive. And to respond violently abrogates the rule of law and the rules of polite society. To continue, he offered to pay the legal fees of people who assaulted his political critics. Devine said, "Yes, I do think that Donald Trump encouraged people to take matters into their own hands and to use violence." I'll stop here to say, as former President Barack Hussein Obama defended and encouraged Black Lives Matter terrorists at the funeral for the 5 Dallas law enforcement officers who were killed in the progressive terrorist attacks last year. You see, as usually happens, the progressive left have 2 sets of standards. One for the people that they agree with, and one for people that they don't agree with. Mr. Devine's selective memory appears to be showing. To continue, he also said that conservatives have mashed up politics and war in their rhetoric. I'll stop here to say that what conservatives have done is to speak the truth. And somewhere deep inside progressives, they understand this. But their rulers have told them that it's all right to give themselves over to violence. And so that's what they do. To continue. One thing I said is that Republicans in this country have failed to distinguish the difference between politics and war, he said, and too many Democrats have failed to observe the similarities. Now stop there for a second, people, and run that one back. What he is doing essentially is accusing the conservative right of inciting violence while encouraging the progressive left to incite violence. Again, the progressive left, the mind masters, the truth twisters, the puppeteers. To continue, Devine said that he isn't one to fight, but if provoked by partisan rhetoric, he can't hold back. Now, I'll stop here to say that I would not expect to see old Jimmy Boy at an Occupy rally or a by any means necessary gathering or on a Black Lives Matter march or rolling with Antifa. You see, folks, people like Jim don't get out there in the field themselves. He acts like Loretta Lynch and just incites the violence and then sits back behind the safety of his keyboard or operates from the safety of radio and television studios. But he doesn't actually get out there on the street and put himself in danger as he does the cannon fodder that he influences. If somebody throw the first punch, he said, I'm not going to sit back and take it. I'll stop here to say very likely he's not going to sit back and take it, because if he ever was out on the street, he would probably be surrounded by a ring of security and praying to the God that he probably doesn't believe in that no one actually does take a punch at it. To continue with the article, for too long, these snowflakes in the Republican Party that are wringing their hands on Fox News at night, well, they have to realize something. This is 15 years in the making. I'll stop here to say that actually, the violence of the progressive left is very close to 150 years in the making. Because it was around that time that Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto, calling for violence against those who disagreed with communism. And since that time, that philosophy has been adopted and adapted by the progressive left in the United States of America. Mr. Devine is once again engaging in redirection here, because almost all of the violence on today's political scene comes from those on the progressive left. To continue, he said that a war of classes has been created by the Republican Party. And I'll have to stop here again to say that the only quote-unquote war of classes that the conservative right has ever created has been to tell people the truth, that you cannot have an economy where large populations of people are expected to not work and be supported by an increasingly shrinking section of that whole population. Encouraging people to empower themselves through work is not engaging in class war. To continue. As for the attack on Scalise Wednesday, Devine said, I think it's horrible, but it was extremely predictable, and I think it was entirely preventable. To stop here, did you ever notice this, guys? Whenever there's a terrorist attack by Mohammedans, or whenever someone on the progressive left commits violence against someone else, those who have encouraged that violence, like old Jim Devine, will acknowledge the unacceptability of the act. Always, though, there's a but. And that but is usually what they use to excuse that violence. Now, folks, I'm going to read you something from the homepage of Jim Devine's website. I figure I'd better do this before he's pressured to take it down. But as of this recording, on June the 20th, 2017, the main headline on the homepage of his website is, Hunt Republicans hashtag. By the way, if you want to get hold of Jimmy Boy on Twitter, he's Devine25, Devine 25. and he created this homepage on his website on the 16th of June 2017. I hope my Hunt Republicans hashtag did not hurt your feelings too much, Snowflake, but I am tired GOPers dishing it out without a response. And I'll stop here to say that a conservative response to violent rhetoric would be in words, but the response that Mr. Devine seems to applaud is with bullets. To continue, however, I am only registering complaints from those who also responded when Sarah Palin, that's Governor Palin to you, Mr. Devine, put crosshairs on Gabby Giffords, which she did not, or when Ditto Heads posted images of Barack Obama being lynched, which, as far as I can discover, was not done. Remember, guys, Jim Devine is not above lying to try and get a political point across. To continue, for way too long, too many sanctimonious conservatives have been waging a war of both words and deeds without an equally loud and effective response. Now, Jim Devine's website is at http://jamesdevine.org/ and you can see this for yourself. But my question to Mr. Devine is, what deeds? What deeds is he speaking of? Because honestly, I can't think of any, except for an encouragement for people to be personally responsible and to liberate themselves through the industry of their own hands and their own minds. That's hardly a war, but to a narcissistic provocateur like Jim Devine, it's good enough to excuse violence. So what do we do about Jim Devine? Would I like to roll up on him, jam my car cane up his rear end, and collapse it out just to see if it makes an impression? Sure. Would I like to punch him in the nose? Absolutely. But I won't. And I would stop anyone else from doing it. Why? 2 reasons. First of all, we are taught in the Bible to love even our enemies. This is something that Mr. Devine and his progressive compatriots don't seem to want to pay a lot of attention to. He wouldn't learn anything from such actions, and they would only advantage him in the end, because then he could play the victim. But also, I wouldn't do it, and I would stop others from doing it, because I'm a conservative. You see, it's been said by some that bad systems are not necessarily made up of bad people. Some of that operates here. Rank-and-file progressives, just as is true with rank-and-file conservatives, want to see the homeless housed, the hungry fed, the sick healed, but we differ in the methodology by which these are to be accomplished. And while the rank-and-file and the progressive left are well-intentioned, their rulers have proven that they are not. And they are prepared to use any means necessary to push their followers into acts of violence that no person with real decency would ever otherwise consider. You see, whether Tucker Carlson wants to admit it or not, there are 2 sides in the United States of America. The progressive side, which defaults to violence when people don't listen to their opinions, and the conservative side, which exercises fully the right to freedom of speech as the founders of this nation intended, but who also understand that that right ends where another's personal business, their property, and their person begins. You see, people, it's easy to be smug and say that you're on neither side or that you're on both sides, and it certainly makes you look wise. But in practical, historical terms, there are always 2 sides. And those who don't pick a side will have that side chosen for them. I encourage those listening to pick the side of peace, brotherhood, and personal empowerment that conservatism represents. Now, I don't know about you, but after hearing about all these narcissistic people on the progressive left, I'm ready for a shower. But I have enough problems with my audio system already, and doing the rest of my show from the shower wouldn't really work very well. So let's settle for an Awesome American segment. That's right. And this time's Awesome Americans are Senior Non-Commissioned Officer of the Army, Roscoe Archer, and veteran, Frederick Campbell. Check out this report from May the 25th, 2017, by the reporting staff of KTVF-TV Channel 11, Fairbanks, Alaska.
This Memorial Day weekend, two friends will come together for worthy causes. Friday evening and all day Saturday, Senior Non-Commissioned Officer of the Army Roscoe Archer and veteran Frederick Campbell are combining forces to raise funds for the Make-A-Wish Foundation and the Military Order of the Purple Hearts Chapter 675. The Elf's Den will provide the location for both Friday and Saturday's barbecue fundraiser, with Saturday being full of fun, games, and a special visit from Santa and Mrs. Claus. Archer and Campbell told us why they decided to raise funds for the two organizations and why they chose Memorial Day weekend for their event. They also mentioned that for more information, you can contact Roscoe Archer.
It's for a good cause, and it promotes our local community. And you know, the Military Order of Purple Hearts, Chapter 675, they help veterans locally in our community. You know, both of us being veterans, you know, I think it's important, and a lot of veterans make up our community, and I think it's important to give back.
One of the biggest things we were trying to implement is not only remembering our fallen, but actually celebrating their cause and their sacrifice. I really think this is a big way to do it, to bring two organizations together for one big cause.
People, our decency should be measured less in our politics than in what we do for others. And that is why Senior Non-Commissioned Officer of the Army Roscoe Archer and veteran Frederick Campbell are, this time's Awesome Americans. And that's it for this time. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, and may your God go with you. Goodbye. The Unpleasant Blind Guy is copyright 2017. Anno Domini.